I ended a 20-year friendship over a playground fight. My daughter Ren came home crying and said her best friend Margot called her ugly and stupid at lunch. When Ren confronted her, Margot denied saying it and told everyone Ren was a liar. Margot's dad Elliot has been my best friend since college, so I texted him and said we needed to talk. I sat down with Elliot and explained what Ren had been telling me. He laughed and said, "Dude, they're 8. Kids say mean stuff sometimes. Margot probably doesn't even remember saying it." I said, "It's happened multiple times. Ren comes home crying almost every day now." He shrugged and said, "Are you sure Ren isn't being a little dramatic? She's always been sensitive." I said, "She's not being dramatic. She's genuinely upset." He said, "I'll mention it to Margot, but I really think you're overthinking this." I let it go, because maybe he was right. The next week, Ren came home with her favorite book ripped in half. She said Margot grabbed it out of her hands and tore it up in front of everyone at recess. When Ren told the teacher, Margot started crying and said Ren ripped it herself to get Margot in trouble. The teacher believed Margot because Margot was sobbing and Ren was too stunned to defend herself. I called Elliot and told him what happened. He sighed and said, "That doesn't sound like Margot at all. Are you sure Ren didn't misunderstand the situation?" I said, "She didn't misunderstand her own book getting ripped in half." He said, "Maybe Ren did rip it and she's embarrassed to admit it. Kids do weird things for attention when they're struggling socially." I said, "My daughter is not struggling socially. Your daughter is making her life miserable." He said, "I think we should take a step back here. You're getting really worked up over normal playground drama." I started keeping a journal of everything Ren told me. Margot telling her she smelled bad, then denying it. Margot spreading rumors that Ren still wet the bed, then acting confused when confronted. Margot convincing other girls to exclude Ren from games, then telling the teacher that Ren was the one who didn't want to play. Every single time Ren tried to stand up for herself, Margot would deny everything and make Ren look crazy. The school counselor called me and said Ren seemed anxious and was having trouble making friends. I explained what was happening and she said she'd look into it, but without concrete evidence there wasn't much she could do. I said the evidence was my daughter falling apart. She said she understood, but her hands were tied. I brought the journal to Elliot and showed him 2 months of incidents with dates and details. He flipped through it and said, "You've been writing down everything my daughter says? That's kind of obsessive, don't you think?" I said, "I'm trying to show you there's a pattern here." He said, "The pattern I see is you coaching Ren to blame Margot for normal kid stuff." I said, "Normal kid stuff? Your daughter is systematically tormenting mine and then gaslighting her about it." He said, "Gaslighting? She's 8 years old. You're projecting adult psychology onto a child." I said, "Children learn behaviors from their parents." He said, "What's that supposed to mean?" I said, "Just talk to Margot, please." He said he'd handle it his own way and asked me to drop it. The next day, Ren came home and said Margot told everyone that Ren's dad was trying to get Margot expelled because he was mentally unstable and obsessed with their family. 3 girls who used to play with Ren now avoided her completely. I drove straight to Elliot's house. I said, "Did you tell Margot about our conversation?" He said, "I mentioned we talked about the girls." I said, "Now she's telling kids I'm mentally unstable." He said, "I didn't say that to her. Maybe Ren misheard or is exaggerating again." I said, "My daughter doesn't exaggerate." He said, "Every kid exaggerates. You're just too close to see it." I stared at him and said, "You're doing it right now." He said, "Doing what?" I said, "The exact same thing Margot does. Denying, deflecting, making me feel like I'm the crazy one for seeing what's right in front of me." Elliot's face went hard. He said, "You need to calm down." I said, "Don't tell me to calm down. I just figured out where your daughter learned this." He said, "Learned what?" I said, "She learned it from you. The denying, the making people question their own reality, the turning everything around so you're never the problem. That's you, Elliot. That's exactly what you do. And she's been watching you do it her whole life." He said, "You're out of line." I said, "I talked to your ex-wife. She told me the same things Ren tells me about Margot. She'd bring up problems and you'd convince her she was imagining them. She thought she was losing her mind for 3 years before she finally left you." His face went white. He said, "She has nothing to do with this." I said, "She has everything to do with this. Your daughter watched you gaslight her mother for years, and now she's doing the exact same thing to mine." Elliot told me to get out and never speak to him again. I transferred Ren to a different school. 6 months later, 3 other families pulled their kids from activities with Margot, and Elliot told everyone I'd poisoned them against his daughter.